Hi, folks. It's Rena Jadov with your favorite celebrity, Dr. Joel Kahn, in the house. And we are chatting about all things health, wellness, COVID, and of course, Black Lives Matter. Um, Dr. Joel, over to you. What's new in your neck of the woods? I think you wrote a book as well, didn't you?
Yeah, well, as I say, since we now have caught this on recording and it is Tuesday, June 2nd, I mean, it's important to point out that my passion is health and wellness and, social situations, emotional ties, safety, food safety, food deserts. These are all parts of health and wellness. You can't be a health advocate without recognizing an enormous part of health, more than this is actually a statistical fact. It is more important that you live in a safe neighborhood, have sidewalks, have playgrounds, have access to healthy food, have social connections that you can count on and be safe with. That actually constitutes a larger part of our lifespan than coronary care units, emergency rooms, ambulances, prescription drugs. It's an amazing website if you want to look at, called determinantsofhealth.org. I actually haven't looked at the website for a little bit, so I hope it's still up. Very sophisticated modeling of how do you and I stay healthy. 11% of the pie is medical care. 11% is doctor visits, surgery, procedures, lab tests, prescription drugs. 89% is the biggest section is actually lifestyle. 38% of the pie is lifestyle. Do you smoke? Do you eat better than average? Do you have better average in fitness than most? Do you sleep well? Some of it is genetics. That's actually a relatively small part, about 18, 20%. And some of it is where you live. You can't always control the air quality, the water quality, the safety, the toxic burden of your soil and your quality of food in your area. But anyways, it's just interesting how this, very difficult time of social questioning and social connection and social, emphasis on equality also links to healthcare. So we are honoring, Blackout Tuesday, because this is not a social media event. This is a private conversation. I have posted my honorary and appropriate, Instagram post. But anyways, this is important. Community is more important than perhaps whether your doctor puts his stethoscope on your right lung or your left lung. It's also important, but it's not as important. So what's new? I was thinking about that because there's, I've been taking a deep dive in the endocannabinoid system, which we can talk about. But actually, mainly probably saturated fat. Since we last met, I have recorded a pretty hot YouTube interview and several blogs, and it's created a little bit of an uproar. Everybody, there's always these questions: oil, no oil, butter, coconut oil, not. You can think, boy, by
Fish
now
oil, not oil.
we
Vitamin
probably
oil, so many controversies. It's enough to drive even.
Yeah. We've probably exhausted this topic by now, but yet I can tell you today, all over Twitter, because of some posts I retweeted or tweeted that involved the interview I did. And I'll put the interview on Heel Circle tomorrow.
That'd be great.
But it doesn't seem like these questions ever go away. Is it okay to have a big plate of arugula salad and take out some extra virgin olive oil from Portugal and sprinkle it on top? Or why can't I spread butter on my toast as another example? So you want to go there? A little saturated fat?
We want to go there because it keeps coming up. Let's go there.
It keeps coming back, and there actually is new data. That's why it's out there right now. So very long history and a very short summary. If you had asked a cardiologist around the time of World War II, and I hate to be historical, and that's actually not very long history when Rena Jadov comes from a society in the old country where you can talk about thousands of years of tradition. We're just going back to World War II. There was a general conception that heart disease was not that common and was due to just general aging. But our soldiers came back from the war and they all got free cigarettes and they were smoking. And we had access to a little better food, and soon drive-ins and fast food sort of appeared. 1950s were heart attack crazy. Actually, it started in the late 40s. So a lot of research, partly because FDR had his hypertension and stroke. So our government started funding research. Then in 1955, as you might remember, a long time ago, President Eisenhower had a massive heart attack. A lot of money was being funneled. The question came up, how do we prevent strokes, heart attacks, hypertension? And food became one of the central figures. It was around the same time cigarettes became a central figure. A little later, in the 60s and 70s, fitness became a central figure. So there was a hypothesis offered. I know this science real well. In 1953, maybe the amount of fat in the diet, which has increased since we become more prosperous after World War II, has something to do with heart disease. That was a hypothesis. It was accepted by some, interesting. It was vigorously rejected by two researchers in New York. If I can remember, Yerushalmi and Hillebrew. I'm proud of myself for remembering those names. And it led to some experiments in science. And at least by the late 60s, early 70s, the conclusion was, and this is really important, it's not necessarily fat in the diet that can lead to heart attack, stroke, and other diseases. But the focus was like a bullseye on saturated fat. Now we got to become chemists. We got to become biochemists. I mean, saturated fat is the number of double carbon chain connections and such. So most of us are not, fat biochemists. But this hypothesis and studies were done that where does saturated fat exist? Butter, lard, Crisco is very popular, hydrogenated oils that were very rich in trans fat, a little different. Meats, cheeses, pepperoni, pizza, croissants, pastries made with butter. Yeah, that if in an experimental situation in humans, not just rats, you add in foods rich in saturated fat, boom, 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 cholesterol goes up and up and up. And when the cholesterol goes up and up and up, if you wait long enough, you see a emergence of heart disease. So I think it was about 1971, the American Heart Association was ready to say, America, eat less saturated fat, eat less butter, eat less cheese, eat less, they didn't say coconut oil, but you would point to coconut oil, eat less meat. And it was very unpopular for the government to say, and they had to kind of change the language quickly when the meat lobby got kind of incensed about it. Eat less cream, eat less full-fat dairy and such. That remains the language. In fact, the largest cardiac and most expensive research study on how to treat heart disease was published 6 weeks ago. The recommended diet was a low saturated fat diet. 1970, 2020, the language hasn't changed. Very, very concisely, in 2008, this is a very cool story. This is all documented. This is not conspiracy. This is not Breitbart.com. The Dairy Association worldwide, they have a group, met in Mexico City and said, the public is drinking soy milk. What are we going to do about that? They think it's not good to drink whole milk. They think it's not good to eat Velveeta. They kind of have a conception that ice cream isn't good for their hearts. This is just 2008. And they published a kind of conclusion. We're going to try and find scientists and influencers that can change public perception. And they have money. And 2 years later, just absolutely on the spot, a paper was published, funded by the dairy industry, it says right at the end of the paper, that questioned the connection between saturated fat, raising your cholesterol, 10 years later have a stroke or heart attack. Didn't disprove it, just questioned it. Didn't actually do any new data. Did a different analysis of the existing data. It's not like they went out there and actually did new data. Well, that created a very big ripple because there's lots of people that like their meats and their cheeses and their butters and their lards. And a couple of years later, a second publication like that was published. Both these publications were just like whipping boy by real academic doctors, by Harvard School of Public Health. And then 2014, Time put on the cover, butter is back, that big yellow gold picture of a ripple of butter. And for the last 10 years, or you can say 6 years, it's been confusion in the public. Oh my God, I turn on the TV and there is a PBS doctor, tall and handsome Mark Hyman, telling us, fat will keep you thin, and confused the hell out of people. And I'm a friend of Mark Hyman, but he confused a lot of people with a public television show by a book of that name, Eat Fat, Get Thin. And never did the American Heart Association change its message, but so many noises were heard. So why do I bring any of this up? And I've been a crazy animal on the Joe Rogan show, on something called mindbodygreen.com, on blogs, on the doctor's show. This was largely BS. Two poor quality scientific studies questioned 50 years of science, but there was a strong influence of lobbyism and money and the rest. The vast majority, as tough as nutrition science is you'd be wise to lower the amount of saturated fat in your diet by eating less or no butter, lard, cheese, full fat dairy, marbled meats, chicken, pork. Eat less, like the Mediterranean diet. It says eat less. Or maybe none, or maybe have a lamb on Easter, but don't have a lamb for another few months, in a traditional kind of Mediterranean diet model. But you could pick any opinion you want. So about 2 weeks ago, I just was browsing. It's called the National Library of Medicine, pubmed.gov. One of the hottest papers in America right now of medical research. I was kind of blown away. There's a new publication of does saturated fat relate to heart disease? It's something called the Cochrane database, Cochrane, generally considered the most independent, high quality scientific group. They throw out garbage studies. They only include high quality studies. They go very deep into any study they accept in terms of all the criteria to call this good science, not lame science. And they published a review that concluded for the first time, we have no doubt saturated fat causes heart disease. So I kept looking around. Where's anybody talking about this? This has been like a war. There's been debates between David Katz and somebody called Nina Teicholz, other big fat surprise. This has really caused some serious
and that's the
social
issue,
media.
When but smart people can't agree, how can the rest of us
exactly? So that's exactly the point. When smart people can't agree, I'll go to McDonald's. That's
exactly.
That's the pop-off valve. That's the pressure valve. So I just couldn't see anybody bringing this up. So I reached out to a few of my friends that have websites and YouTube channels that are larger than mine, and did a couple of blogs. So anyways, it's good science. It's consistent with data since really the 1950s. Now, I'm not the kind that pounds the table. I don't eat any butter. I don't eat any lard. I don't do any coconut oil in general. I mean, it might show up in a pastry.
I'm going to pause right there. And what are your thoughts on coconut oil?
Well, it's largely unstudied enough to pound the table and say never, never. All we know is its biochemical constitution is 85% saturated fat compared to beef, which is about 40%, or butter, maybe 50%. So it's about the highest saturated fat food that any human will ever eat. Palm oil is pretty close, and you're not going to just eat palm oil, but it's in a lot of baked goods. Maybe not what you make at home, but a lot of industrial baked goods. Because saturated fat, like palm oil and coconut oil, have good shelf life. And then coconut oil has this special miracle status that is largely based on a couple books that, again, were more salesy books than science books. So I'm in line with the American Heart Association. We don't have all the studies we want, but we generally would recommend that there's enough reason to recommend limit or eliminate coconut oil, except use it on your skin. Feed it to your dog. Dogs can eat all the saturated fat they want. They have a completely different physiology. But not probably a good idea to take 2 scoops of coconut oil, throw it in your coffee, throw it in the blender, and make bulletproof
or butter,
coffee.
Right?
Or what?
Or butter.
Or butter. Well, it's usually both, right? To
throw
make
2 tablespoons of coconut oil, or throw butter into your coffee and blend it and drink it. May not be such a great idea if you're trying to watch out for your heart health.
So, I mean, what's the implication? I mean, I always go back when I do interviews or podcasts. It is tough to do nutrition science. I like Dr. Walter Longo, the founder of the Prolon 5-day fasting mimicking diet, who wrote a book called The Longevity Diet in January 2018. And he's head of a gigantic research institute at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And he talks about before you make a decision on nutrition, you got to look at all the data. You don't look at one study. You don't even look at one type of study. You look at basic biochemistry. Is there any data that foods rich in saturated fat prolong our life, slow down aging, reduce cancer, reduce heart disease? No, there's actually basic science usually says the opposite. How about randomized studies? That's hard to do, but there actually were over 300 small, high-quality randomized studies. Let's feed normal volunteers a diet high in saturated fat, a diet low in saturated fat, and they generally led to the conclusion you'll quickly raise your cholesterol, you'll raise the inflammation markers, not good findings. You might even raise your blood sugar and insulin level quickly, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks. And then there's something called centenarian studies. Do we see people living in Okinawa, Japan, probably the longest lived population traditionally, putting coconut oil in their coffee? No, they don't do that. There are higher fat societies like Crete that have good lifespan, but it's extra virgin olive oil. And there are low fat societies like Okinawa that basically don't use any of that stuff. But you're not going to find a high saturated fat society that can really claim long lifespan without disease, more than average. And then there is the epidemiology, stuff like Dr. Ansel Keys did, tough stuff. But countries that eat more saturated fat like Finland, way more heart attacks than their surrounding neighbors. Then Finland cut back its saturated fat as a national program, way less heart attacks. So the end conclusion is, and the point for everybody listening or watching this in the recording is, the message is really simple. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, peas, lentils, spices. I'll make a little comment on spices in a second.
What do you put when you make your bean stew? What do you use?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very faithful to your heritage. I love, well, you taught me about Vedic Herbs, the company Vedic Herbs. Yeah. And I like throw their curry powder in organic curry mix. It's like throwing rice over my shoulder for good luck. I mean, I have bottles of Vedic herb products all over the place, VEDIK. Yeah. And I love their curry mix. I'll just tell you an interesting comment. I started writing blogs. I didn't really know about blogs very much in 2013, and I've probably written 1,000 since. My very first one was the role of spices in lowering inflammation. Very first one I wrote. And I went through some science, ginger, garlic, rosemary, turmeric, and good science about if your joints hurt.
Coriander, so all of that.
Coriander, all the rest. Just in the last, let's say 4 weeks now, a very cool study was done about people eating, really good science, people eating a meal. One of the meals they added to it a 14 spice mix. It basically was curry powder plus like an Italian mix, rosemary, oregano, thyme and stuff. They're not traditional Indian spices, but Mediterranean spices. And the other meal wasn't with a 14 spice mix. And there was a dramatic lowering in blood tests that show inflammation by just every day adding spice mix. I mean, it's the easiest way to get plants in your diet.
It really is.
Put some rosemary.
And concentrated nutrition, right? That's the whole thing about herbs. And sprouts. It's concentrated nutrition. And
it is concentrated. I really, really like organic if I'm going to put herbs, spices, because these plants are grown and they're sprayed with pesticides. And if I'm going to put concentrated nutrition, I really don't want concentrated pesticides. I can't measure it, but it's pennies more for a lot of the spices to get organic rosemary versus standard, to get organic curry powder versus standard.
And with this COVID lockdown, Dr. Joel, it's so easy to grow. So we've actually started a little herb garden. Nice. And it's so easy to actually get these seeds. You crush them like cilantro. You just toss it in and boom, you've got some fresh herbs, and rosemary is easy to grow. Like a lot of these things are actually real easy to grow.
Yeah, what I've done.
You don't even have to pay for it. Organic, free in your kitchen self.
My quarantine adaptation is a very cool guy who lives in Joshua Tree, a little south of you, who real entrepreneur, plant-based guy. And he went out to New York about 15 years ago, and he started up and then expanded to about 15 stores called Organic Avenue. bright orange signs, real good marketing, organic, fresh pressed juice, and a few other items. I ended up selling it and making a lot of money. The company that bought it ran into the ground within a couple of years, so it doesn't exist.
So typical.
Then he had, you may know this one, he had a startup called Juicero.
Oh,
It
yeah.
looked like your current coffee maker,
Yeah.
but the little packet you put in was organic juice powder. And by hitting the button, you got a glass of green juice. Well, Silicon Valley invested over $100 million, Elmer Perkins and such. And 2-3 years later, the company was sold and the company went bankrupt. A lot of times that happens. So he's a Sprout man now. He's got a new book called The Sprout Book. Doug Evans is his name. He's a great guy. I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times. And also I got his book. We did some Instagram lives and stuff. And I used to have like dirt trays, and I was growing sprout seeds, and you're actually growing microgreens. It's wonderful. But then you got dirt all over the house. He taught me all I got now is mason jars with screen tops. I mean, this is like no rocket science. I put in organic mung beans or organic lentils or organic broccoli seeds.
Yep.
Every day I rinse them with a little bit of water and drain it out. And 5 days later, I got this jar where, we just started with a handful of seeds, and the whole jar is full of sprouted beans or lentils or peas or seeds or something. And these are organic, fresh, living food, kind of like what you're doing. But actually, you're doing in mason jars in your kitchen on the window, so it doesn't even require, if you live in an apartment or a condo, you don't have access to grow a outdoor organic garden.
Exactly.
Grow sprouts. I mean, sprouts, broccoli sprouts have 50 times the health benefits of broccoli. Yeah. And partly you're eating them as fresh as it comes. There's your mason jar, and you're throwing them on your salad. Whereas the broccoli you're buying at Trader Joe may have sat in that bag for, God knows, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months.
Exactly. God knows what's
really don't know.
I worry about what they put in these bags. So I do like things that come from my kitchen sill over something that I'm opening a bag. So no doubt about it. What about COVID? Where are we on that?
What's COVID?
What's COVID-19? I don't know.
Nobody even talks about it anymore because we have masses in the street. Not worrying about it. I mean, we had a real run of it in Detroit. We had packed out hospitals, and we built 2 temporary military type hospitals. They never really got used because they opened just as the peak was falling. Frankly, the hospital system I'm at is the largest in southeastern Michigan, and I get an email now every day or two. I mean, it's fallen dramatically. 1,400 people in the hospital with COVID. Now it's under 200. I'm not even sure we know for sure that those are new and active cases. Some maybe people have been stuck on a ventilator for months. I don't know if we're done with it, and I certainly personally would distance, wash, in appropriate settings, wear masks, not everywhere. My clinic has been open nonstop, and now live patients are back, and I generally will wear a mask, and they generally wear a mask. But sometimes we break that rule, to be honest. I think a lot of it is internally boosting your resources with great nutrition, like your organic garden, like fresh sprouts, like vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, melatonin, good sleep, good fitness, not excessive alcohol, don't smoke. The overall mortality rate of COVID-19 is low, except in certain populations, inner city African Americans, obese, hypertension, diabetes, and certainly nursing home. Nursing home might be, the worst disaster that's happened. I do want to say I just hit my chat button, Graziella. I'm glad you like herbatonin. Herbatonin is a plant-based melatonin made by a very cool company in Australia that makes other herbal approaches for hormone balancing, like premenopause, menopause, postmenopause, male andropause. They make a very cool version of melatonin that's from plants. Most melatonin is either synthetic or from animal sources. And I'm finding many people, it's not expensive. Herbatonin, Herbatonin. People have responded real well to it, so thank you for the shout out. But I don't know, COVID-19, I mean, last 10 days, nobody's talking about a vaccine because we've been, down a different path in this country. I'm concerned
Do you
that,
think we're going to have a vaccine?
uh, you know, the general data has been, and I'm no virologist, is, the influenza is called an RNA virus. COVID-19 is an RNA virus. They have a tremendous ability to morph, to
Exactly.
change, to
Exactly.
transform. So, generally when we take an influenza vaccine, it may reduce for 25 to 40% of people and be a benefit, but the vast majority of people taking it, it doesn't benefit. Um, I am concerned that, by the time there's a vaccine, this virus will be a different strain and a different version.
Exactly.
I'm not anti-vaccine. It's made major inroads. Polio vaccine obviously changed America for the better.
Yeah.
But
Vaccines are amazing things if they work.
yeah, until the last week, I mean, it was like if you didn't get a vaccine, you're not going to get on an airplane. I don't know if that same pressure will exist when we come out of this current, kind of racial recognition and crisis we're in. So I don't know. There's not been much talk about it. Um, there has been an article published in a British journal called The Lancet, a very respected medical journal, that hydroxychloroquine, the HQ drug that President Trump talked about, was not of any value and was of some risk. But the interesting backlash is it's now being beat up as some of the worst science ever published in a good journal, and probably with major financial conflicts behind it. So it's interesting that,
Which is
in
the article?
20,
So what I got a little confused there. So which is the part that's beating up? The fact that they
yeah, well, so, here you read the headlines: new large database about hydroxychloroquine shows ineffective and increases your death rate. 8 days ago, that was a headline all over
right,
the world.
right, right.
In the last 8 days, people that can dissect articles, the epidemiology, the statistics, and kind of who put up this article, who's behind it. Is it a pure academic pursuit like Cambridge or Oxford? Is it a company? And it turns out it's a company that has major conflicts and vaccine ties and all. So not me, but many very respected academics are saying, how did this get published? This is some of the shoddiest science, just like the saturated fat science.
It's
I'm
just
not,
so
that's not a pro-president, anti-president.
yeah.
I'd like to know. I have patients that tell me I had COVID-19. 2 hours after taking hydroxychloroquine, I felt better. It was an amazing response. That's one way to analyze things. Then there's big studies. Ultimately, there's got to be some kind of randomized study. But because of this article in the Lancet, the World Health Organization put a major study on hold. Why are we even doing this when
Yeah,
this speech
yeah.
is? So, I don't know anything else really hot and new. The zinc thing, take zinc. That's my bottom line. It's not brand new, but there's been a hypothesis. Why do people do poorly on the ventilator? And is this just another bad pneumonia that ventilator support should help? And it looks like, if you can stay off a ventilator with a severe case of COVID-19, you're better off. There is a theory that this virus affects our red blood cells, our hemoglobin, our oxygen carrying capacity, that zinc is needed to be an antidote to that effect. And we quickly exhaust our zinc stores, which may be why some people with COVID-19 describe loss of smell, loss of taste, because those are classic low zinc symptoms. And I'm still every day taking about 50 milligrams of zinc. I've recommended that to most of my patients. Not forever, because the usual dose is more about 15 milligrams of zinc, which you can get from oysters if you're an oyster eater. You can get it from plant-based sources, seeds and nuts. Tofu is a pretty good source of zinc, organic tofu. But anyways, a little more zinc than that might be a good thing right now to keep our zinc stores high. So if we ever contact the virus, we're ready to fight this alternative theory of how it affects our health.
Is there any deficiency with ear ringing or ears being blocked or ear sensitivity?
Yeah, that's a toughie. The ear ringing is often called tinnitus or tinnitus. I mean, I'm not a world expert on it. It can be inner ear problems, like Meniere's disease, where there's fluid built up behind the eardrum, inner middle ear, I think.
Right.
Um,
But is that
there
a
can,
deficiency
you know,
related, or we don't know? For example, you mentioned like with zinc, we know that loss of taste
yeah,
is zinc
right,
related. So I was just curious if there's a specific deficiency that we know is known to cause things like fluid buildup.
yeah. You know, tinnitus or uh, ringing in the ears hasn't been described too much as a COVID-19. It's a common complaint of patients. If it's really repeated, sometimes you get a CT scan of the brain because there can be a little benign tumor by the eardrums called a glomus tumor. So it's a pretty broad differential diagnosis.
Okay.
Graziella has a
Recently, I've had
question.
so many people around me complaining of a combination of eye infections, ear ringing, and not necessarily ringing, sort of blocked,
Yeah.
you know, maybe fluid buildup, it's blocked, it doesn't feel
It,
good, my
it's
eyes
May,
don't feel
it's
good, got
June.
vertigo.
It's seasonal allergy peak. At least in
I think
Michigan,
that's the
we've
other
got these
issue, right?
ragweed growing, these yellow flowers growing everywhere. So,
Yeah,
common things are still common. Yeah,
exactly.
Graziella said, if I go to have a blood test, do they automatically do a virus test? The answer is no. There are many vendors now that are offering, if you're acutely ill, if hopefully not this week, you developed a temperature of 102 and a cough and a loss of smell and shortness of breath, you would want to get a swab up your nose to see if you actively have the coronavirus in your mucous membranes. That's a technology called PCR, polymerase chain reaction. But a lot of people have come to me in my clinic. Look at it, in February, I was sick for 2 weeks. Early March, I was in California and I was coughing and I didn't feel good. But I'm all good now. So you don't want the swab up the nose. It's not a bad test. It's not all that comfortable. And you want a blood test or of some kind for the antibody. Did you develop an antibody when you were sick in February or sick in March, or you were in Las Vegas in January at the CES show, and you wonder with all the Chinese vendors if you contact the coronavirus? You want an antibody test. It's called the IgG antibody. You were sick with the virus, you survived, and your immune system made antibodies. So there are many vendors. There's none that are proven to be perfect. There are some that are FDA authorized, meaning they seem to be a little better quality. I draw in my office Quest Labs, and they have a COVID-19 antibody that has FDA authorization, but doesn't mean it's perfectly accurate. It takes about 24 hours to come back, but you have to order it. I mean, it's a 39504 COVID antibody. That's the Quest code, and you have to put some billing code. So, no, you have to find a doctor willing to draw it for you. Carol says, what about certain genes that affect the risk of the virus? There is since you asked me, there's a very obscure theory that there's a gene called ApoE. If you inherited from your parents a gene called ApoE4, you have a higher risk of heart disease and a higher risk of Alzheimer's dementia down the road. And there's a theory that may also increase your risk of getting particularly sick if you contact the coronavirus. You may not do as well with it, but that's preliminary. And other than that, there also is a theory, and I wrote the paper on it actually, that if you inherited lipoprotein little a, the topic of my most recent book, Lipoprotein little a, which is selling very nicely, which is a good thing to help people around the world. But if you inherited that and have a high blood level and get coronavirus, you may be more prone to a serious version of the coronavirus where blood clots are a problem. Other than that, I'm not aware of any genetic factors that make you more likely. And yeah, so Grazia was saying, I've not been sick. I don't trust what the government might impose. I don't want to degenerate this into a conspiracy theory, heal circle interaction. But there has obviously been a lot of debate who do you trust and who's got the real information. And we saw Dr. Fauci every day. Now we don't see Dr. Fauci very much.
Where did he go?
I don't quite know. He quarantined himself for 2 weeks because he was exposed, like a lot of people. But then he's out there. But I don't want to really go down conspiracy aisle because I don't know. It's just ugly stuff.
It's all
Stay
about.
positive on
Yes.
Blackout Tuesday. I want to stay positive. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know. Anything else? Hot, hot, hot. We talk about saturated fat enough to know, choose olive oil, not butter.
I have a question.
Always best off. Yeah.
I have a question. I get asked this question. I have no idea. Is there any benefit to getting an antibodies test? Can we rely on those tests? Do those tests make any sense to take?
Yeah. So there's situations coming up. I have divorced patients that can't visit their children without an antibody test that's negative to show to court. That came up today. So yeah, go get an antibody test so you can go see your 10-year-old and your 8-year-old. That's pretty extreme and hopefully doesn't pertain to too many people. You want to go visit an elderly parent or relative when a nursing home reopens or at their own home. You might want to know if but it's really a mixed bag. So your antibody test is done and you're positive. And you can say, look, grandma, I had the virus. I recovered. I'm immune to some degree. We don't know to what degree. Actually, my blood is actually valuable. I could donate my blood to help people that are sick because there's some theory that if you've recovered and have the antibody, your plasma might have the antibodies to be helpful. So, there's situations like that. And then there's just curiosity. I wonder.
Meet grandma, like if I'm immune and it's still in me, that's the part I'm not clear.
Well, we think if you're immune, but we don't know how long.
But will I infect somebody else?
Yeah, if you're afebrile, and you have the antibody, in my clinic, we've done a little over 100 patients, and about 10% have the antibody. There are people, and they're fine and they're well. So, people are disappointed when it comes back negative. On an individual level, what's better? You were coughing in February and your antibody's positive, or you weren't coughing and your antibody's negative. I mean, you should be cautious either way. You don't win the lottery either way. It's not really clear. I mean, all I tell people when I tell them the result is just keep up the protection, stay healthy, eat well, because we don't know, even if you're antibody positive, that you're protected for 6 months or 4 months, or somebody comes up to you and is ill, that you're not going to get a second case.
That's the issue.
Not enough now. So, if you're totally well and you were well in January, February, March, there's no reason to do it. I had a horrific cough for 2 weeks, end of February, early March. So I did my blood test. It was negative. It was something else after an airplane flight, probably just some other viral URI. Anything else, Rena? Hot, hot, hot.
Any other questions? Let's see.
Yeah.
Does our group have?
No, right now, I think we've answered the intelligent and precise questions.
Perfect.
Anything coming up that anybody should know about? All medical conferences have gone virtual. There's traditionally a medical conference in Washington, D.C., end of July called PCRM.org, Physician Committee Responsible Medicine.org. It's going to be online, maybe called, it's got a different name for the conference, International Nutrition Conference. But it's kind of nice. Everybody can watch it. Sometimes they do some for free and some for pay. Trying to think of any other really great events coming up that people shouldn't miss. Just kindness, love, tolerance, respect, understanding, sprouts, fitness, sleep. Check your life.
Stay happy, right? Stay happy. Do your breathing.
Try.
Do your breathing. You're breathing.
You got to breathe heavy now.
Stay centered.
You see Santa Monica on fire, you better stay pretty centered in breathing, because we're not used to this. But
turn the television off, people. So this is what I've done. I
would
would not allow the television on in the house.
We're about elevating and supporting and creating a community.
Yes, yes. and minimize how much television you're watching, minimize it. Your watching isn't going to change the world around you.
Right. Yeah.
And
You need to know what's going on, but you don't need to spend too many hours a day, a
exactly. So
couple
what I
minutes
do
a
is
day.
I have alerts,
Yeah.
right? So I control what I click on. I don't let the TV force things on me. I have a summary of things so I can see where the riots are. I can see what the issues are. I can see global issues, local issues, national issues. And then I choose which one or two things I may want to dig deeper into. And frankly, all I care about is what's happening in my neighborhood so I can be prepared, right? If there's rioting right outside my door, I want to know. If there's a curfew tomorrow, I need to know. But to watch hours of that, the visuals, so many people are getting insomnia, mental health issues. I think we're about to see a big mental health crisis that's coming up.
Right. Yeah. Well, we might be seeing it right now. I agree. Maybe the only other thing I got to say, there's an interesting website. If anybody, wants to look at it, called plantbasednetwork.com. There was some friends of mine that decided to create a internet kind of, you don't call it a TV station, but something you can look at on Apple TV or Amazon Fire, plantbasednetwork.com. So I am actually launching a new show tomorrow. I've already recorded about 10 or 12 episodes. And I, again, will certainly share it on Heal Circle when the first episode comes out. It'll be on their site and these more traditional sites like Apple TV. So I've now taken on the role of health reporter. Your Ron Burgundy, if any of you saw, Will Ferrell's great movie, Ron Burgundy. So I don't have to wear a red velour sports coat to do it, but kind of fun stuff.
That's kind of cool. And what are you going to be covering on that?
Well, if anybody wants to, I don't like to promote, but I have a website, drjoelkahn.com, and one of the buttons says hashtag Kahn Chronicle. So anytime you go to hashtag Kahn Chronicle, it's got that day's new health news that I post and have created kind of a website for. So the show is called Kahn Chronicle. And it generally talks about 4 new and interesting health news articles that day. They won't be there the next day. So if you don't catch the Kahn Chronicle that day, you will catch other news the next day. Might be 5 health benefits of blueberries. Might be 10 reasons you need to sleep. Might be 6 things you didn't know about chia seeds. Or it could be a new science study. And anyways, it's a quick, high energy, fast, ADD-like, my style. Quick little news show. But in the plant-based world, there's nothing been done like this. So
fantastic. That sounds fantastic.
A quick student of Zoom and good quality cameras and lights and just simple stuff, actually. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to try to convince you to help us because, as you know, I'm doing freemeals.org. We're feeding families.
Yep.
And we've partnered up with all these amazing restaurants because they happen to be owned by a lot of my friends. Yeah. And so I've been calling in favors left and right. And now a lot of them are open to, hey, work with us and let's create a healthy meal.
Let's do that.
So that's what we're going to try to get you to, get involved. Let's create, we're calling it the Heal Meal. Right. And it'll be in restaurants. It'll be a meal that's been approved by, Dr. Kahn and, a few of the others that are getting involved with us. And I'm really excited because I think a big part of this finally is revealing that people need to take charge of their health because if you want to fight off COVID long-term, you got to get healthier.
Yeah. And even the emotional strain we're under is, at least in some response, a food-related reaction.
Exactly. So together, we're going to help restaurants come up with heal meals that are certified by doctors like yourself, that people can be comfortable knowing that, hey, if I order this from Taco Bell, believe it or not, it's still going to meet my requirements for being heart healthy and diabetic healthy. The ingredients are going to be great or organic, but hey, at least it's not going to have the saturated fat in it, and it's going to be high on the vegetables and the salads and the leaves. So
good for you. That's what we need. Not just for those that can afford to, shop exclusively at the best markets. I'm driving through Oakland, California, and I have a broad variety of choices that are healthy for my brain and my heart and my family and the whole thing.
Every restaurant should offer that. All right, Dr. Joel Kahn, you're amazing
Thank
as
you.
always. Thank you. For the rest of you, stay smiling, stay safe, stay joyful, meditate, breathe. It will pass. This too shall pass.
A lot of spices.
A lot of spices.
A
Sleep.
lot of tolerance. A lot of tolerance and respect.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.